Me, name is Naomi. 31 years old, HR analytics manager at a tech company in San Francisco. Sitting in my office staring at a spreadsheet that's about to end my career. The data is clear, undeniable, replicated 3 times. And it contradicts everything my boss believes. Everything I thought I believed too. In 30 minutes, I have to present these findings to a woman who built her entire identity on the opposite conclusion. My hands are shaking, not because the data is wrong, but because it's right. And the truth is about to make a lot of people very uncomfortable, including me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. 2 years ago, I joined Lumina Technologies. Fast-growing tech company, about 400 employees. Based in San Francisco, very progressive culture. I was hired as HR analytics manager. My job was to use data to improve hiring, retention, and workplace culture. Perfect role for someone who believes in evidence-based decisions. I'd always been a data person. Numbers don't lie, don't have agendas, don't play politics. They just tell you what's true. Or so I thought. My boss was Maya Chun, 47, Chief People Officer. Impressive woman, 20 years in HR leadership. Published author on workplace equity. Regular speaker at conferences about dismantling bias. She hired me specifically for my analytics background. Said she wanted data to drive our people decisions. I was excited to work for someone who valued evidence. First few months, I did standard HR analytics, turnover patterns, compensation analysis, engagement surveys. Nothing controversial, just useful insights. Maya was pleased with my work. Said I was exactly what the department needed. Someone who could translate feelings into numbers. Then Maya announced her big initiative, the Blind Hiring Project. She'd been advocating for it for years. Finally got executive buy-in and budget. The premise was simple. Traditional hiring is full of unconscious bias. Recruiters favor candidates who look like them. Names, schools, photos all trigger assumptions. Women and minorities get filtered out unfairly. Blind hiring removes those triggers. Anonymize everything and let pure merit shine through. Maya was convinced this would prove what she'd always believed. That bias was the primary barrier to diverse hiring. Remove the bias and diversity would naturally follow. Because talent is equally distributed across all demographics. The only reason it doesn't show up equally is discrimination. I believed this too at the time. Seemed logical, seemed fair. Couldn't wait to see the data prove it. Implementation took 3 months. We redesigned the entire hiring process. Resume stripped of names, photos, addresses, school names. Just skills, experience descriptions, and accomplishments. All identifying information removed or anonymized. Candidates assigned random ID numbers. Initial screening done by algorithm based on job requirements. Skills assessments administered blindly. Coding tests, writing samples, analytical problems. All evaluated without knowing who submitted them. First-round interviews conducted via voice modulator. Candidates' voices altered so gender wasn't obvious. Interviewers couldn't see candidates, only hear modified voices. Questions standardized, responses scored on rubrics. Only final interviews were done in person. By then, candidates had already proven themselves through merit. The in-person meeting was just culture fit and logistics. We launched the pilot with 3 departments: engineering, marketing, and customer success. 200 positions to fill over 6 months. Large enough sample size to draw real conclusions. I built the analytics framework myself, tracking every stage of the funnel. Who applied, who passed screening, who aced assessments. Who made it to interviews, who got offers, who accepted. All cross-referenced with demographic data that candidates voluntarily provided after the process. We'd compare our blind hiring results to historical data, prove that removing bias improved diversity. Maya was certain the results would vindicate her life's work. Month 1 data started coming in. Early patterns were interesting. Application rates looked similar to before, but screening pass rates were shifting. More candidates passing initial screening than expected. The algorithm was less restrictive than human reviewers had been. Maya was encouraged. Said this proved human reviewers were biased. Month 2, the skills assessments happened. This is where things got complicated. Coding tests for engineering, writing and strategy exercises for marketing, problem-solving scenarios for customer success. All graded blindly by panels who didn't know candidate identities. Results were clear and consistent. Top performers on assessments clustered in unexpected ways. I ran the numbers 3 times, thinking I'd made an error. The demographic breakdown of top performers didn't match our assumptions at all. I flagged it in my weekly report. Said we were seeing unexpected patterns. Needed more data before drawing conclusions. Maya nodded and said keep tracking, probably just noise. Month 3, the picture became clearer. We had enough assessment data to see real trends. I spent a weekend running every analysis I could think of. Controlling for variables, checking for confounds, looking for any explanation that fit the expected narrative. Couldn't find one. The data was telling a story nobody wanted to hear. Top performers on blind assessments didn't reflect the demographic distribution of applicants. In engineering, male candidates outperformed on coding tests by a statistically significant margin. In marketing, female candidates outperformed on creative tasks, but underperformed on analytical components. In customer success, patterns were more mixed, but still showed unexpected clustering by demographics. The whole point of blind hiring was to prove merit was equal. That only bias created demographic disparities. But with bias removed from the process, disparities remained. Different disparities in some cases, but disparities nonetheless. I didn't know how to present this to Maya. Scheduled a one-on-one, prepared my data carefully, walked into her office feeling sick, started with the methodology, explained how rigorous our process had been, then showed the initial findings. Maya's face changed as she looked at the charts. She asked if I was sure the data was correct. I said I'd verified it multiple times. She asked if maybe the assessments themselves were biased. I said we'd used industry standard tests, validated across multiple populations. She asked if perhaps the candidate pool was somehow skewed. I said we'd actually gotten more diverse applications than before. The difference emerged in the assessment phase, when everything was blind and merit-based. Maya sat back in her chair, said this can't be right. 20 years of research says bias is the primary factor. Remove bias and outcomes should equalize. I said I understood, but the data showed what it showed. She asked what I recommended. I said we should continue the pilot, gather more data, see if the patterns held across larger samples. Maybe there were factors we weren't considering. Maya agreed, but looked shaken. First time I'd ever seen her uncertain. Month 4, the interviews happened. Candidates who passed assessments moved to voice-modified interviews. More data, more patterns. Interview scores showed similar clustering to assessments. Top performers on standardized interview rubrics still showed demographic patterns. Not always the same patterns as assessments, but patterns nonetheless. And when we revealed candidate identities after the process, the hiring recommendations from our blind system produced different demographic outcomes than our old system. In some ways more diverse, in some ways less, but overall, not the clear proof of bias Maya expected. If anything, the data suggested our old system, with all its supposed biases, had actually been helping certain groups through what might be called positive bias, or preferences that favored underrepresented candidates. Remove those preferences and pure merit assessment produced different results, not necessarily results anyone wanted to see. Month 5, I compiled the full analysis. Comprehensive report on 6 months of blind hiring. Every metric, every demographic breakdown, every statistical test. The conclusions were unavoidable. Blind hiring did change outcomes, but not in the direction Maya predicted. In engineering specifically, blind assessment selected more male candidates than our old process. because the old process had included soft preferences for diversity. Recruiters unconsciously boosting underrepresented candidates. Remove that boost and raw assessment scores drove decisions. Raw assessment scores showed gender differences. Not huge differences, but statistically significant ones. In marketing, the pattern was different. Blind assessment selected more diverse candidates overall, but fewer in senior roles, because senior assessments weighted analytical skills heavily, where demographic patterns also emerged. The data didn't fit any simple narrative. Not the progressive narrative that bias was everything. Not a conservative narrative either. Reality was complicated, messy, uncomfortable. Some bias existed and hurt certain groups. Some bias existed and helped certain groups. Remove all bias and merit assessment showed its own patterns. Patterns that didn't align with equal distribution assumptions. I prepared my presentation for the executive team. Maya would be there, along with CEO and other leaders. This was supposed to be her triumph. Proof that blind hiring was the answer. Instead, I was about to show data that challenged her worldview. Night before the presentation, I couldn't sleep. Part of me wanted to massage the numbers. Find a way to present them that softened the conclusions. Made Maya look less wrong. But that would betray everything I believed about data integrity. Numbers don't lie unless you make them lie. I wouldn't make them lie. Presentation day arrived. Conference room full of executives. Maya introduced me proudly. Said I'd been instrumental in the most rigorous hiring study we'd ever done. Said she couldn't wait to see the results validate our approach. I felt sick as I connected my laptop. Started with methodology, established credibility. Everyone nodded along, impressed by the rigor. Then I got to the findings. Showed the demographic data from blind assessments. Showed how patterns emerged despite removing identifying information. Showed how our blind system produced different outcomes than our supposedly biased old system. The room got very quiet. Maya interrupted. Said there must be flaws in the methodology. I walked through every safeguard, every validation. She said the assessments must have been culturally biased. I showed the third-party validation research. She said maybe the sample size was too small. I showed statistical significance calculations. She was grasping at straws. I recognized it because I'd done the same thing. When I first saw the data, looked for any explanation except the obvious one. CEO spoke up, asked what the data actually showed in plain terms. I took a breath and said, the data shows that when we remove all identifying information and evaluate candidates purely on blind assessments of skill, demographic patterns still emerge in the results. Different roles show different patterns, but the assumption that equal talent is equally distributed and only bias creates disparate outcomes is not supported by this data. Bias exists and matters, but it's not the only factor, and removing it doesn't equalize outcomes. It just reveals other patterns we weren't seeing. Room was silent. Maya looked like I'd punched her. CEO asked what I recommended. I said we should publish the findings internally. Be honest about what we learned. Continue using blind assessments as one tool, but not assume they'll produce any particular outcome. Focus on building pipelines and development programs, rather than assuming bias is the only barrier. Meeting ended awkwardly. Maya didn't speak to me afterward. I went back to my office feeling hollow. I'd done my job, presented the truth. But the truth had cost me my mentor's respect. Week after the presentation, Maya called me into her office. I expected to be fired or marginalized. Instead, she surprised me. She said she'd spent the week reviewing my analysis. Had her own team try to find flaws. They couldn't. The data was solid. She said this is the hardest thing I've ever had to accept. I built my career on certain assumptions. Your data challenges those assumptions. I have two choices. Reject the data and protect my beliefs. Or accept the data and evolve my understanding. She paused. Said the first option is easier. But the second option is what I've always claimed to value. Evidence over ideology. Truth over comfort. I can't advocate for data-driven decisions, then reject data that contradicts my preferences. That would make me a hypocrite. I asked what she wanted to do. She said publish the findings. All of them, uncomfortable parts included. Use them to start better conversations about what really drives outcomes, about how to build genuine equity, not through assumptions but through evidence. She said I'd shown her something important, that good intentions aren't enough, that believing something doesn't make it true, that real progress requires honest assessment, even when honesty hurts. I was stunned. Expected defensiveness got growth. Maya was bigger than her beliefs, able to evolve when evidence demanded it. Following months were fascinating. We published the blind hiring findings internally, had company-wide discussions about what they meant. Some people rejected the data outright, called it flawed, biased, harmful, said publishing it was irresponsible. Others engaged genuinely, asked hard questions about what the patterns meant, whether assessments really measured what mattered, whether different outcomes were necessarily problems. Maya led the conversations with humility, shared her own journey from certainty to questioning, said she'd learned that complexity was uncomfortable, but pretending complexity didn't exist was worse. We redesigned our hiring approach, kept blind assessments as one input, added other evaluations of potential, not just current skill, invested in development programs and pipelines, focused on individuals rather than demographic targets. Year later, our hiring outcomes were interesting. More diverse in some areas, less in others. But everyone hired had proven themselves through merit. No one could claim they were a diversity hire. No one could claim bias had excluded qualified people. The process was transparent, rigorous, defensible. Maya gave a keynote at an HR conference, talked about what we'd learned, said the hardest part of data-driven decisions is accepting data you don't want to see. Said she'd spent 20 years believing certain things. That bias explained all disparities. That equal talent was equally distributed. That removing barriers would equalize outcomes. Our experiment challenged those beliefs. She had to choose between her identity and the evidence. Chose the evidence. Audience reaction was mixed. Some applauded her honesty. Others accused her of reinforcing harmful narratives. Said she was giving ammunition to people who opposed equity. Maya responded calmly. Said truth isn't ammunition, it's foundation. If our equity efforts are built on false assumptions, they'll fail and backlash will follow. Better to build on reality, even uncomfortable reality, than on comfortable lies that eventually collapse. 2 years later, I'm still at Lumina, Director of People Analytics now. Maya promoted me despite the uncomfortable presentation. Or maybe because of it. She values truth tellers, even when truth hurts. That's rare, and I respect it. Our hiring process is considered industry-leading now, not because it produces particular demographic outcomes, but because it's rigorous, fair, and transparent. We evaluate people as individuals, not as representatives of groups. We look for potential, not just current performance. We invest in development, not just selection. It's not perfect, but it's honest. And honesty is the foundation everything else builds on. I think about the presentation that almost ended my career, the spreadsheet that shook my hands, the data that challenged everything. I could have hidden it, softened it, spun it, protected my boss, protected comfortable beliefs. But that would have been the real betrayal of my profession, my integrity, my purpose. Data doesn't care about our feelings. Reality doesn't bend to our preferences. The best we can do is see clearly and adjust our beliefs to match what's true, not adjust our perception to match what we believe. Maya taught me that in the end, not through her certainty, but through her evolution. The willingness to be wrong is the prerequisite to being right. And being right matters more than feeling right. even when feeling right is easier. Anyway, that's the story of how a feminist executive implemented blind hiring to prove bias was everything. Discovered data that challenged her core beliefs, faced a choice between ideology and evidence, and chose evidence. The experiment didn't prove what she expected. It proved something more important. That truth matters more than comfort. That data beats assumptions. That good intentions need honest assessment, not blind faith in predetermined conclusions. Merit is real, but complicated. Bias is real, but not everything. Outcomes are shaped by many factors, not just the ones we prefer to see. Remove bias and patterns still emerge, because people are individuals, not interchangeable units sorted by category. The best hiring evaluates individuals, as individuals, not as data points in demographic calculations. That's what real fairness looks like. Treating each person as a unique case, not prejudging them by their group membership, whether that prejudgment helps or hurts them.